Thank you very much, Noreen. It's great to belong to this organization. And it is wonderful to see so many people here. I mean, you all look so different, you know. I know you socially, or I know you professionally, and there you are sitting down here. And this is my friend for 50 years. 50 years of friendship. I'm looking at her and I didn't recognize her. And there is that's who, when we talked about the collaborations with the Center for Fiction and CUNY, you were one of the first people to really make that happen, so I'm very grateful to you. And for the poets and writers, there is Elliot, and my senior editor, Ibrahim. He answers email at 2 in the morning, and on Sundays. And on Sundays, it's just amazing. And just all the people that I've, people from my book club in Queens, I'm really grateful to see all of you. And some of the board members who came here too, I'm pleased about that. And Louise.
And you, Elizabeth, you're going to read, yes?
I am.
Are you going to read what I demanded?
I'm going to do. And she asked me, what are you going to read, Elizabeth? And I thought, that's a good question. Let me tell her what I'm going to read. She says, but why don't you read this? so she shouldn't have asked me the question. She should have started off by saying, why don't... Oh, what's going on?
Right back there.
Do I really need it? I've been teaching for years.
We both have big mouths.
Yeah, I don't think I need it. I'm hearing this echo coming at me.
Do you want to turn this off? Or
Yeah. We're
is
teachers.
this okay? Okay.
You can't be a teacher unless you can project to the one in the room in the back who is not paying attention. This is after my mother has died, and this is a week old. There is the week. Except for one of us, whose absence still baffles me to this day. We are all there, my father and 10 of his children. Chairs are placed in a semicircle a short distance away from my mother's coffin, which is raised on a dais. Against the back wall, at the opposite end of the room, is a comfortable, overstuffed couch. My father stands in front of it, his shoulders caved in. He looks drained, exhausted. He takes a step forward, and I think he means to sink himself into the couch. I am wrong. He totters for a second, almost losing his balance, but then he straightens up. I notice the return of the twitching around his temples, though, the fluttering I saw the day I arrived. It is barely perceptible, and at first I think nothing of it. But then the twitching increases, snaking down his arms and legs in tiny rolling waves. Soon he begins to drum his fingers against his thighs, his fingers moving faster and faster, pressing the fabric of his pant leg into his flesh. His eyes stretch open wide and a vacuous grin parts his thin lips. I nudge one of my brothers. Go to him, I say. 2 of my brothers approach my father, but now he is no longer standing still. He is dancing. It is a strange dance, and we stare at him in astonishment. He stomps one foot on the ground and then the other, each time his body shaking rhythmically to a beat he alone hears. Inch by inch he moves forward, the dance taking him toward the front of the room, where my mother lies stiff and still in her coffin. The image of scantily dressed Africans in a village ceremony dancing to the beat of tribal drums flashes across my mind. I chase the image away. This is my father, the collector of fine art, the lover of classical music, the man who quotes Shakespeare to me, the man who oversaw billions of dollars for an international oil company. But my father is dancing faster now, the grin on his face full blown into soundless laughter, his eyes darting mischievously across the room, not directed towards us, not to my mother's still body either, but at something in the far unseen distance, something that fills him with joy. And suddenly a curtain parts, and I know what he sees. I know what he hears. It is not the dancers he sees, hip-writhing, bare-breasted women in an ancient village ceremony. Nor does he hear the thrum and boom of African drums. It is the color-splashed carnival of his days and mine that glitters before his eyes. It is the music of the streets, the heart-pounding rhythms of the steel pan that pulsate through his ears. On the last day of our two-day carnival, just as the sun was beginning to set, my father would take his daughters and wife for a last lap, a jump up with him through the city streets. How we had waited for that moment. For 2 days, my brothers were free to follow the bands, but my sisters and I were forced to stay with our mother and the younger children on the sidewalk of the car park behind my father's office. He would check on us from time to time, but mostly he was gone, jumping up with his friends in the carnival bands. Is this the memory that travels through my father's head now, filling him with joy and remembrances of mischief? Is he recalling those late carnival afternoons when he slipped back to us, his face alive with the beat of the steel pan music pulsating through his ears? As darkness began to fall, he would return from the company of his friends, teasing a smile on his wife's face, enclosing her in his wide arms, and we, his daughters, relieved to see them happy together, would press our faces against them. How we danced and danced through the streets of our city, hands waving in the air, feet slapping against the asphalt cooled in the evening breeze, the heat of the day swept away with the descending sun, the sky a canopy of bright stars above us. Our mother was young again, in love again, her head flung back against her husband's shoulders, her arm encircling his waist. But now, as my father comes closer to my mother's coffin, he slows down. He slides one foot forward and then the other, all energy seemingly drained from his legs. My brothers tighten their hold on his elbows. They have reached the edge of the dais, and the wide smile that seconds ago broke across my father's face has disappeared completely. His lips form a tight, thin line. His chest caves in. His head lolls to one side on his neck. One of my brothers whispers something in his ear, and my father looks down on my mother's frozen face. The dull, empty expression that was in his eyes when he first entered the room returns, but even duller now, lifeless. He does not resist when my brothers lead him away to the couch in the back of the room. He slumps down on the cushioned seat and closes his eyes. Mercifully, he falls asleep. Jacqueline says we should pray the rosary. It was our mother's favorite prayer. We sit on a semicircle of chairs. Jacqueline chooses the glorious mystery. There are 5 parts to this mystery. The first, the resurrection of Christ. The second, the ascension of Christ into heaven. The third, the descent of the Holy Spirit. The fourth, the assumption of Mary. The fifth, the coronation of the Blessed Virgin. As Jacqueline calls out each section of the glorious mystery, it becomes clear to me why, of all the mysteries of the Rosary, this was my mother's favorite. The Assumption of Mary. Not only did Christ rise from the dead, but his mother too ascended, body and soul, into heaven. My mother loved Mary. The Mother of God was a comfort to her. She had lost her mother not long after the birth of her second child. I was 2. My brother was 1. My mother likely pregnant again. My mother needed a mother. She turned to the Mother of God. I too needed a mother when I had my son, alone in America, without family or friends to support me, my husband itching to return to his lover. But I did not have my mother's faith to call on the Mother of Christ for comfort. Now, though, I find myself praying that Mary has not abandoned my mother. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. That is what you wanted me to read, Louise.
And I think everybody in the audience knows why. That's a moment that has everything for me that memoir can do. Those moments that crystallize just about everything. you see that father and you take him through that incredible dance toward his wife's dead body, but then you take us back, you shift your attitude towards him, you see something new about him that you've not known before, and then you take him back into the family dance, and then you see them as young and lovers, and then we see him moving from that animated man to the old man now, and then we get the ending with the prayer at the way. It's an extraordinary sequence, and I always like to know how works happen, because I'm a writer and I need to hear. How did this happen? Where this extraordinary chapter that we just had the privilege to hear, where in the process of doing this did this moment happen, the writing of this? How did you get it so right?
Well, I think this book was magical for me, and that's about all I can say about it. I don't know. I just know I had experienced that scene. I didn't know I was going to write about it. It definitely affected me. I mean, I'm just remembering it now. And it just, and I'm not a crier, so I don't know why tears are coming in the back of my eyes, because I am definitely not a crier. But it was extraordinary to see my father dancing at what was the saddest moment of his life, because it took him a long time to accept that my mother was dead, and he had to actually see her. And it was just extraordinary to see that, and I think all of us, there are 11 of us and 10 of us were there, we were like in shock. And I knew, I just knew what had happened to him at that moment. Because I had lived that moment. I had lived that moment so many times. Because, of course, when I said that the children were happy again, that was the feeling I had, because my father loved dancing, and very bright man, but he loved the world. He had a very worldly life. So on Carnival, he and the brothers, of course, they were men, so they can do whatever they want. Males, they can do whatever they want. And we, the girls, had to stay back with my mother and this interminable line of babies. And so I know my mother was really irritated at those moments, I mean, not only did she have the babies to feed and take care of, but she wasn't participating in any way. So I know that when he came back, she was angry and she was frustrated. She'd take it out on us too. She was frustrated, but somehow he made magic of it, as he always did. He could turn around, and so it just, I just thought that this was what he had lost. This was what he had lost.
You said, I just want to read from a page, something that you say. It is my passion to discover who I am and why I am here in this world that drives me to write fiction. And I am convinced that discovering the who and the why can happen only if I tell all. There are two things I want to ask you about. First, you did that with fiction, but now you've done it with memoir. Was there anything different about the writing of memoir? Anything else you discovered about yourself? Because in the novels that you've written, you dealt with some of the same material. Was there anything new that happened because of the memoir form? That's my first question, and I'll have you answer that before I ask you the second.
So the first one is,
was there anything
new that I
you explored
yeah.
your mother's cancer, and other family issues
Yeah.
in your novels, but this is now memoir. Is there anything new that you discovered in the writing of memoir that you hadn't realized before?
Yes.
Okay.
I think what happens in fiction is we create this world, and we can hide behind the characters. We can let the characters do stuff that we had not experienced or that we knew, and to try to figure out something. So there's that freedom and that liberation that you get when you're writing fiction. And of course, what Memoir asks you to do is to remember as truthfully as you can what actually happened, but it's your memory. And here's what I discovered, but it's only after the book was published. And that was that if you read my novels, a recurring theme is that tension between the mother and the daughter that doesn't seem to get resolved. And as I got closer to trying to resolve it in my novel, Anna in Between, I came up with the idea of the fictitious mother and the fictitious daughter. It was because the daughter emigrated at a young age, and the mother hadn't asked her to come back. So the daughter was always, well, why didn't you ask me to come back? And the mother says, well, look at what you got in America, look how great it is. So I thought that was the tension. And then when I wrote the memoir, I flashed back to when I was 5 years old. And I don't think I would have done that in fiction. And I still did not understand why I did that until the book was over and gone. So I flashed back to when I was 5 years old. And at 5 years old, you know, there were, how many of us? 5 of us. And my father had gone on fellowship to London. My mother cried and cried and cried and cried. I just remember, if there's anything I remember of my childhood, is my mother crying and crying and crying. And I'm totally helpless. She couldn't be a mother. She couldn't do anything, and she was useless. And so finally she went on the ship and left us.
To be with him.
To be with him, and left us for about 6 months. I was 5. My youngest brother was 1, and there was a toddler. We were born one after the other, so we were babies. And so in writing Memoir, when I was finished, I knew the story, right? I knew the story. The story's been running. I didn't know what the meaning of the story is. The meaning of the story is that sense of abandonment came at an earlier age.
Came earlier than you.
Yeah, so it wasn't about going to America. I had that sense of abandonment from the beginning. And so would I have discovered that in fiction? I don't think so.
Why not? Because you could hide behind characters?
Because I would have continued, I would have romanticized it. Because there is something very romantic in that crying, crying, crying mother. And going off to meet her husband. And the other pieces you have to figure out is my mother is one scaredy cat. She cannot stay, she's dead now. She couldn't stay in the dark. She always had to have someone with her. The idea of her being on a ship, you know, I mean, it was just extreme. So I would have romanticized it, I think, if I were writing fiction and made it something that showed about the love and whatever.
But in the memoir, you're not unkind to her. You know, she does, you use the word abandon here. It doesn't feel so much like abandonment in the memoir. It feels honest that she did abandon you, but it's more fully realized than, you know, I think what I'm saying is that when we write memoir, what I seem to be feeling is that we work with and then through the rage that we may have felt.
Yes.
So that the portraits on the page are not vituperative, they're not angry, they're full. Because what you do is you climb into the mother who needs to be with her husband, rather than take the point of view of the 5-year-old girl who's being left behind. You let yourself move into the mother's point of view, and then you even see them over there.
Yeah, yeah. I had to, I think with this memoir, I walked in my mother's shoes, which I had never done before. And part of the reason why is the miracle of what actually did in fact happen, which is she died in August of 2008. And though I have been living in America for 40 years or more, and the most I have ever gone back to Trinidad is like a week or 10 days, no more than that in a given year. And in 2008, I went 3 times. The first time for 3 months, and decided I was going to stay with her. The second time, I just happened to have come back in May. And the third time, someone just said to me, Elizabeth, we had some event, let's go for 3 days. And I arrived, I ended up on the day of her 90th birthday, and she died 3.5 weeks later. And that, I thought, was, and just going through all of that in that year, was just amazing. Because, in the 3 months, we didn't know how to speak to each other. And at that point, of course, my mother is going to be 90. She wants resolution. I want to fight. I am ready to, let's face this and let's work it out. And she doesn't have too much time. Not that she was ill, but she was at that age, and she wants this healed. So she would say things like, I love you, and I couldn't find that word anywhere in myself. I mean, they were strange in my ear to hear it from her.
Do you think, you said that you were able to walk in your mother's shoes? Tell the audience who may not know, the timing of your writing the fiction about your mother versus the timing of you writing the memoir. Was your mother alive when you wrote the fictions?
All of them or the last?
The last.
Okay. Probably the last one was Anna in Between. And Anna in Between was fiction, but it really faced the fact that the time when my mother had breast cancer.
Was she still alive when you wrote that?
Yes, very much. She lived 15 years after that. Yeah. And she had a tumor as big as an orange in her breast that had ulcerated.
Do you think that you were able to write, to walk in her shoes because she was dead, because the circumstances of your life had changed dramatically? I mean, do we have to, I wonder this when I work with my students who write memoir. Is it easier for us whose parents have died to face those critical issues because they're not there to read what we write? Was it easier for you to do that?
I think that in Anna in Between, in the times I was writing about my mother, about the fictitious mother, I wanted to create that situation. So I was making it probably better than I really believed it was. But because I had that year, that miraculous year, I had come, thank God, to healing with her. I wish I had more time, because we had just reached a really good place where we were able to say that to each other. And, but I had gotten there. So, I've almost forgotten your question.
No, I think...
But so it wasn't so much her death.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't that
time.
I think her death is what propelled me to write the memoir, but and helped me more to heal. Talking about the title of your book, but I had actually miraculously. I mean, the last thing that happened between my mother and me, as you know, in that book, on the day of her birthday, she was well. Nothing was wrong with her, and she has a favorite child. We all know, So this favorite child could do anything, and my mother, lights up like a Christmas tree. Mm-hmm. But that little birthday party we were having for her, I was beginning to notice that my mother was not reacting to that favorite child. No matter what that child was doing, my mother was very distracted. And when we left, she walked with me to the gate, and she just pulled me back and pulled her arm around my neck and just tightened it and said, I love you. That was the last time, the last moment we had.
I think, the human condition, one of the horrifying and wonderful facets of the human condition is that we continue to have relationships with people after they're dead. Yeah. And I think a memoir like this articulates that better than, I think, any other art form. Did the writing of this shift your perspective? I know you've spoken something about that, but did it shift your perspective of your mother so dramatically that it enabled you to tell certain truths, if you will, about her that you had been unwilling to write about before?
If you're talking about her background, was that what you're talking
Yeah.
about? Her background, my mother's background. We grew up knowing absolutely nothing about my mother's background. I mean, zilch. Zero. She had one sister, and it was almost like a secretive kind of meeting she had with the sister. We knew nothing, except, well, if I saw my cousins in the street, I wouldn't know who they are. We knew everything about my father's family, every single thing, the whole shebang. So there was some way in which my mother was ashamed of her background for a lot of reasons, and some of it I do tell in the book. But there were a lot of, so so we talked, we kind of, among my siblings, we sort of talked about it. But what I discovered in writing that memoir is why it is they worked out my parents. That they both had their secrets. And that they were insecure. Well,
And this is where race comes into it, and
Right.
colonialism.
Right.
And so it's just not a family story. I don't want to say just not as if a family story is enough.
That's
But
correct.
the miracle of this book is that we suddenly see that it happens, it evolves through the course of the narrative. We begin to see this family in the context, a gigantic context of colonialism, the differences between white and darker colored people within the same family. The certain people in Trinidad's allegiance to mores that come from the colonizer England, other people's rejection of that, and then you fit into this grand scheme in your own particular way. But it is as much for me, an outsider to this world, an incredible analysis of the very difficult dynamics in a single family as a result of generation upon generation of history. And
colonialism.
yes,
I mean, it
and
begins with my name. My name is Elizabeth Nunez, and people always say to me, should I put the tilde? And then somebody who speaks Spanish gives it a Spanish accent, and I say, no, it's the English Nunez. Why? Because my great-grandfather came from Portugal. He was Nunes, we were Nuneses. And my grandfather, my grandparents lived to almost 100, both of them, 98 and 99. And they were vigorous, so we knew them really, really well, and they had all their brains about them the whole time. So he took that S off and put a Z. And why? Because in colonial times, that we all had to use the books that the English told us we would use. And there was a poem by John Keats on first looking into Chapman's Homer, in which John Keats credited Cortez, who first steered onto the Great Pacific. And of course, it was not Cortez, it was Vasco Nunez de Balboa. And my grandfather was a headmaster, and he was furious with the colonial government for not even putting a footnote or changing it, and having a whole bunch of children in the school believing that it was Cortez who had discovered the Pacific in this poem by, of course, we love John Keats, by John Keats. And since they wouldn't do it, he said, ta-da! He took the S off and put Z. And then, to add on, my father's older brother, Winston, kept the S. The reason he kept the S, he was light-skinned. And so he emigrated to Canada and passed as a sort of dark-skinned Portuguese man. And he married a white Canadian and never brought his wife or his children to Trinidad. And there were lots of rows in the family for that because he was a minister, some kind of evangelical, whatever.
And the child growing up in this family, you, knows nothing about this history. This is one of the miraculous things that memoir can do. It can remind us that when we were children, we looked at our family, our parents,
Yeah.
and we thought that they were behaving in ways that maybe we didn't like. We had no idea of who they were, what their history was, what their past was, what their desires were, what their demons were. But now you, as the writer, now understand what happened back then. And that double vision of then and now that people write about Memoir, talk about all the time, I think it's magnificent in Memoir because it just shows us, the reader, a life lesson about how historicizing our families, understanding their past, contextualizing their challenges, makes us understand them in a different way.
Oh, yeah. Makes them like people.
People in a very, very rich historical context. And it is so not Freudian, you know, like when you see the family as a self-enclosed little sphere with no history, no past, no background. This just explodes that family, and it shows us everything about why these two people fell in love, why they had the difficulties they did, why they raised their children in the extraordinarily powerful ways they did. Every one of your siblings is a major, major player in whatever field that they happen to be in, all of them. How that happened, why that happened.
Well, you know why it happened. It also has to do with color, too. My father was the darkest of his... Figure his father was Portuguese and African. His mother was blonde for all purposes. She had African ancestors, but a lot of English in her. So they look like the rainbow. One of my aunts married a mayor in England and passed for white, and my father's sister. And here is his brother also doing the same thing in Canada. But my father was my color, you know. And they went to Jesuit schools, and he saw that the Jesuits beat him to heck and didn't beat his brothers. And he, you know, there's some stories I say in that. So for him, he was determined to prove that dark-skinned Nunez could achieve what the Nunezes, and he bypassed all of them. I mean, you know, my mother used to say she doesn't understand why she's so lucky. Because, yeah, they all, every single one of them. So people ask me, oh, do they think that you're so wonderful that you are a professor and you're an author? I said, no, not compared to my siblings. They don't think anything of it. They have much more.
Can you talk about the forebear who drove his children to school?
Yes.
Because it was, was your, what, great?
That is
Great.
my Portuguese great-grandfather, whose picture stood in our house all the time, was married to a freed African woman. Now that he married her was kind of miraculous in a way. But what was extraordinary about her is that her father, just as he was at emancipation in 1834, he had one child, and that was Anne Rose Dormer, and he decided he would educate her. The British had set up the first school for colors, as they said. And he would drive in a horse and buggy for 4 hours, one way, back and forth. So this Portuguese man who married this daughter of an enslaved African, she was much more educated than he was. And thank God she was, because he died eventually. He died when they had these two children. But she educated her sons, so that one son became a dentist, and the other one, my grandfather, was a headmaster, and then he became various and sundry things. So, and the thing that connected my father to his father, my father adored his father, and so we had that same feeling, you know, he'd always take us to see, is that my grandfather was the dark one, his brother was light-skinned, and my father was the dark one. So that connected them on the, they both, and I don't care what they say in the Caribbean, we don't have race, because, you know, everybody's black in one way or the other, but we have skin tone. And so, and we have hair texture.
And you talk about them, but no one in your family will?
No,
Are
they
you-
say that's American stuff.
Right.
We don't have that. They practice it.
But they don't talk about them.
No, when I talk about it, but this was, when you read that quote where you said something that I say all.
Yes. The why can happen, discovering the who and why can happen only if I tell all.
Yeah. But this is what I love about America. And this is the freedom I love in America. I mean, there are lots of bad parts about it, but Americans, and in Trinidad, you know, those skeletons, at least in my family, put them in the closet and lock the door. And so when I go to Trinidad, I can get black and blue on my legs, just giving my assistance. They're constantly kicking me. They're just all on alert. They are on alert. You know, when we are among ourselves, it's fine. But as soon as a stranger comes in, everybody's on alert. Elizabeth is going to talk. She is going to say something. So, kick, elbow, whatever. It's just, they haven't read this memoir. So, well, one of them has read it and has objected to the way I portray something about my father. So I look at writing and things, but I do not think that you are being fair. So it's true, what I said was true, but they, you know, it's just, but I couldn't live in Trinidad, you know.
This is so many things, but one of the magnificent things that it is it's an emigration memoir, but it debunks traditional notions of who emigres are
Yeah.
and why they come. So could you say something about that? I mean, I don't know if that was in your mind's eye, as it were, as you were writing, but it so tosses the stereotype of the emigre narrative right out the window.
But I have to look at Ibrahim Ahmed over there when I say, but I talk about, because I thought when I put that passage in, he was going to take it out. And I noticed that he put a break. There was a break. I was writing this, before I had it, it was merged into that chapter. And there's a break, and then he gets it. Where I say that there's a comfort Americans have, because the Statue of Liberty says, give me your core and your this and your that. And so they want their immigrants to be like that. They love the immigrants who have the immigrant story. I was poor, I was uneducated, I was downtrodden. And there's a lot of immigrants who are not like that. And for me to say I was nurtured in America would be a huge lie. All that I am really happened in Trinidad. America gave me the opportunity to expand on that potential, but it didn't put it in. And so sometimes when you look at immigrants and you say, well, why do these immigrants do so well? Well, people say, well, you know, it's the psychology of the immigrant, you've left home and you have to try harder. That may be true, but a big part of it is that's where they were nurtured. They were nurtured somewhere else, and when they came here, everything was there.
You also talk about how well your siblings who stayed behind did.
Yeah.
So that,
yeah.
so
that
that
was
you just disprove the notion that if people stay behind, they are nobody. If they come here, they become somebody.
Well, yes, because
how many of them stayed behind? Well, I know many.
well, we all traveled back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. When I think of my father getting up in the morning to pull a cow from the field, to have somebody milk it, so that could pay his tuition to go to the best school in Trinidad. His light-skinned siblings, the parents paid for. When his turn came, suddenly there was no man. And that's what he had to do. And he did the best of all of them.
How did you find out that story about him? The story about the cow and the milking. Was that family lore? Did he tell you?
Well, you know, I always was amazed at the connection between my father and his father, and how he wanted us to make that connection. I mean, my father would take us at least once a week, sometimes twice a week. And you have to figure my grandfather died at 99, so there were many years of this. Going to his father, spending time with his father. So there was a kind of, and whenever there was something that happened that he couldn't work out, he would talk to his father. There was, what was it? And you were right, it's when I was writing the memoir, I figured it out. I didn't figure it out before.
Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing.
In the writing.
In the writing,
As
I
you
figured it
say,
out.
in the writing.
In the writing, I figured it out.
Thinking about it doesn't
No.
get you.
Yeah,
a solution.
I didn't know what it was. And now it's clear to me what it was.
This
It's
is
clear.
the most important advertisement for writing memoir. You don't know anything until you try to do this work.
And then all the little stories started to make sense. One of them is my sister, in our 11, I have two sisters who are darker than I am. I know all of this is foolish, but there we go. And my father was very close to them. And now I see. And one of the sisters told me that one day my father wakes her up, he and my mother wake her up, they tell her to get dressed, and now they are living in the south of the island, and they say they're taking her to the north of the island, right? And my sister doesn't know why she's going. She's the only one. She's like 12 years old. She's dressed up, and my father reaches to the Hilton Hotel, which is an upside-down hotel for us. It's on a mountain. So the entrance is on top of the mountain. Drives the car in and he stops and he says, I want to take you to tea here so that you can know what you deserve. It affected my sister's life completely. And she said to me, I know why he did that. He wanted me to know that even though I was very dark-skinned in a society that liked light skin or whatever it is.
So you're finding these patterns as you
Yeah,
write.
and I'm not making the association. They're little things. And then they all come together. And I see that this was hounding my father all his life. And probably hounded his father. And it had its bad parts, but it had its good parts. And it's what drove him to constantly quote to us, ambition should be made of studer stuff all the time. You know where that line is from.
With time constraints, do you mind if we open it up to the audience for questions?
Let me just say one more thing to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, thank you for this book.
You are a sweetheart.
It gave me so many hours of pleasure. I had the opportunity to read it more than once, and I hope that the readers will read it and enjoy it as much as I did.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you.
Elizabeth, how long did it take you to write the memoir?
This was a magical book, which is key. And what was miraculous about it for me is the structure key. I would not have, and I could not have planned that the structure would have been the way it was, that it was going this, it was only around 4 days, and it was going like that. The whole, no, not the 4 days to write, the memoir, it's around 4 days, not 4 days to write.
But say something about the structure. It's 4 days, but it keeps going
Yeah,
back.
it's 4 days. So it starts from the day I get the news in New York that my mother, I need to come home right away. And I get on the plane, and when I arrive, my mother had died that night. 2, it goes to her burial. So we go there, and somehow I push back. Something pushes me back, and then I come back to that. And then I start again, and then it pushes me back, and I start again through the 4 days. I would not have thought of that, anticipated that structure. I have had maybe 1 or 2 books that did that to me, where that happened, and it happened.
When she's writing a memoir, she wants to know how long it took you.
How long a book can take you, you sit down and you write it till it sounds right, and it feels right.
Days, weeks, months, years?
It could take years. I don't think you can put a time on it. I mean, a book can take you 5, 6, 7 years to do because you just, I think I think what the test is your own integrity. For me, I'm the judge. I'm the one. Is this sounding right? Are the sentences going into each other? Does it have a cadence, a rhythm? Is it saying what I want to say? And the discovery of it. I think it's, you know, some people tell a publisher, this is what I want to write, you know, or try to get a contract before that. To me, I have to finish the book as good as it gets. It has to be right for me. So then when I send it to you, we have a little fight. We don't. Yeah.
I'm also from the Caribbean, from Haiti. So I can relate more or less to what you are saying, with all color, the nuances, and the class situations, social class structures. You mentioned about your experience, your mother living when you were 5. When you write about that experience, I'm assuming you're writing from an adult point of view, because at 5 years old, how much can you meaning or interpretation? Because I live, like for me, a pandemic was part of my life because I didn't live with my father, I didn't live with my mother, but I didn't blame them because it was a more financial aspect of it.
So wait a second, you are asking me how can I remember at 5 years?
No, I'm asking, I'm trying to understand from when you write about that experience.
I think not to cut you short, I wrote this memoir in the present tense, which is a nice kind of, it's a scary but a nice way to write. And it just, I remember, you don't want to remember that. You want to remember that in a romantic sense. It's a romantic idea. But when I put into that story that we all had measles and we all had chicken pox, and at 5 years old, I'm taking care of somebody who has chicken pox and measles.
And you're getting postcards from your mother.
From my mother, and father, posing at Trafalgar Square. Every one of my sisters has that picture of my parents in Trafalgar Square, posing. And my father telling us that he took my mother to Place Pigalle in Paris, and how she closed her eyes when they threw up the can-can. I'm 5 years old, of course I remember that. I remember that. Because that is bouncing against the hardships that I am having at home. And how do you work that out? You are into the romance of what that is said. You have to read, again I say it was magical, and I mean that by saying how it came to me that I wrote it that way.
But what you said was that present tense was scary, but that present tense gave you that.
Oh yeah, but you know who I'm copying? J.M. Coetzee. Every one of his novels is present tense, and I read him like I read J.M. Coetzee, who wrote Disgrace, Youth, Tons of, how do you pronounce his name?
I said Coetzee, but I probably haven't.
I said Coetzee once, but somebody told me to say Coetzee. Yeah, they said to give the So I am fascinated by his writing. The simplicity of his sentences, the bang he gets, and the rhythm of it, and his use of present tense. So, you know, sometimes you find a writer that you love. You fall in love with the way the writer writes. Like if you read my Bruised Hibiscus, Gabriel Garcia Marquez is all over that. You know, it's all over that.
You had the courage to write your memoir in the first person. You wrote his memoir in
Yes. Mm-hmm.
not the first person.
Yeah. But Love in the Time of Cholera is his memoir for
No,
sure.
I mean, Coates, how we were saying, his memoir is not in the present, is not in the first person.
And he even cheats further because that book, Summertime, where he has a character called John Coetzee, who is exactly who he is. And he starts talking about all his love life and everything else. You know, my students love that book. I don't know why, but they do. So I think to answer the question, I mean, books are your best teachers. I mean, we both teach, but books are better. Let me speak for me and not for you. Books are a better teacher than I am, but you have to know why, what you're doing with the book. I was telling Louise, I'm now rereading for the umpteenth time Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse. And God knows how many times I've read that book. And it just happens that Louise is a Virginia Woolf scholar.
I say now was no more. Question there?
Hi, yeah.
And then there.
Hi, Professor Nunez.
Hi there, student of mine,
So,
from long ago.
Both our great-grandfathers are from Madeira, and I, was filled with tears to hear you talk about the issue of color, because I never considered myself white until I moved to New York City. And when I grew up in California, and I was never dark enough, and I was never white enough for either. And when we discovered our grandparents were from the same island, and we knew some of the same people.
There was some connection, yeah.
So I want to thank you for that and writing that story that is, I feel, invisible until now. But also, I'm going to forget. But I wanted to know really what you're doing next, because I had the pleasure of being in class with you while you were writing the memoir. And just wondering what you're writing next.
We were talking about that, Louise, a few minutes ago. Can you teach without writing?
No. But I know what you're writing next. Do you want to tell them?
No, but I want you to say to say a little bit more about what you do. Because you mentioned that I was teaching and writing
And
the
writing.
memoir. And you just said to me just before we left, you can't understand how teachers don't write.
I can understand, especially teachers of writing who don't write. I think you have to be a role model for your students to do your writing in the middle of a very complicated life. I started my life as a writer having 2 young children, one of whom was hearing impaired, teaching 4 classes and running a household. But I was writing. I was writing as much then as I do now, I'm ashamed to say.
But it makes you an authentic teacher of creative writing.
That's right, because you're facing the
Because when you're
challenges.
teaching the students, you are going through what they are going through. And I try to tell them, I'm no better than they are. I mean, I am facing the same kind of problem to make visible what's in my head. We are both trying to make that visible. And that when we put it on the page, it doesn't look like it. And what I have on you guys, that I have learned that I have to do it over and over and over again. That I have to tell the truth to me first until that I have made visible in my head. Whereas the students hand me their first or second draft and say, take it. And I have to go through it and say, nah, that's not it. But we are going through the same process.
There was a gentleman back there.
Let me first commend you for a beautifully written book.
Thank
I really
you.
enjoyed it, as usual.
Thank you.
But I have some questions for you.
Oh, good Lord.
It's on his desk. Very dangerous when the desk is
Picks up a paper.
Why, number one, why or how is it that your sister Mary is different from the rest of your siblings, judging by her open display of love and emotion? In chapter 4, first, when she jumped on your mother's lap, and second, when she was crying on your shoulders at the airport. That's question 1. Number
But
2.
no, let's stop there. I think you only get one.
Right.
One question and one right at the end.
Was Mary hard for you to write about?
She would have been 5 years ago. But I keep saying, one of the advantages of getting older, you say it's my truth. I'm trying to write the truth. I hope you can handle it. And that's it. I'm not worried about if you think I'm a bad person or not. But she wasn't. Because if you continue to read that story, I come to the realization of why she was crying. She was not crying. I ended up knowing that she wasn't crying for my mother. She was crying for what she missed of my mother. And that scene of her jumping on my mother's lap, you see, I saved her. I saved her because, and I don't want to be a spoiler for the story, I saved her because of my mother's reaction. Now, we haven't talked about the Catholic Church, because to me, in this memoir, if anything goes down, it's the Catholic Church.
That was going to be my second question.
If anything goes real down, if there's any fear I have, it's someone will tweet Pope Francis. Guess what this heretic wrote?
That illuminated so much for me.
That's what I was
Presence of
saying.
that church.
Now, that part, I don't think I could have done it if my mother were alive, because she was such a holy roller. But the children, I mean, come on. No birth control and no divorce. My poor mother.
And someone was willing to sacrifice your mother's life
Twice.
because of doctrine and
Yeah.
dogma.
Mm-hmm.
And it was your father who said no, yes?
Okay, so you figure there are 11 children. My father was married twice, so his first wife died in childbirth. I mean, you get pregnant, you're looking to death, right? So his first wife dies in childbirth. He marries my mother pretty soon after, like a year or 2 years after. And my mother has 14 pregnancies, 9 live births, 5 miscarriages, or having them at home. And and in one of them, she's almost bleeding to death. And my mother says, take the baby, let me go.
And your father says.
And the priest says, yes, take the baby, let her go. And my father, thank God, was hunting. He's a man of the world. He did all that hunting, fishing, playing chess, running around.
Also to feed you with the food. that
Yes,
came from
he did
hunting
that
and fishing.
too. He did that too, and he comes just in time, and he says, are you guys crazy? Of course, my mother was so glad he said that. But, that's why she was alive. And the last time, here's my mother thinking she was in menopause. My father goes to Canada. She says, wow, let's go, it's great vacation. She's 50 years old. They hit the hotel and she's bleeding. They have to call the ambulance, and they barely saved her. And why is all of this? Because she is afraid that if she used artificial birth control, she would go to hell.
And you also talk about the impact, your imagined impact on their sex lives, how
Oh, yeah.
cruel.
Yeah. Not only, I gave my mother's example, but I can imagine it happened to a lot of women. You're afraid to have sex. Because sex means a baby. You're afraid to have sex. And I think,
One more question.
you know,
One more question.
and then the question of divorce, right? You're 21 and you get divorced, you can't have sex after that.
Here's another Hunter student. Another Hunter student.
Hi, yes, another Hunter student. I write memoir also, so I was wondering, when you decided to write this memoir, I mean, had it been something that you had been thinking about for a while, and once you wrote it, did you feel a sense of freedom? Because sometimes when you write memoir, you talk about stuff that you never talked about with other people, and then you finally get it off your chest onto paper, and it feels so liberating. And I was wondering if that's how you felt.
I'm a novelist. That's what I write, novels. It's an accident that I wrote a memoir. I just fell into it. But I think they both do the same thing in terms of discovery. That you don't, you write a piece of fiction, and the thrill you get as a writer is in the discovery. And the thrill you get in the memoir, to me, is the discovery. Of course, this is more direct in the memoir.
But I'll remind everybody what you said before, that with the memoir, you felt an empathy for your mother that you hadn't when you wrote fiction.
That is correct. I'm taking a long time to answer
I know, the
that.
memoirist is sitting in this chair, wanting one memoir.
It's taken a long time to say that, but it's true.
Well, can I thank Elizabeth on behalf of everybody here for those magnificent books?